Next on the mic is Esteban Ucros. He is part of a three-man ship. It's called Popular de Lujo. They are based in Colombia, and they are bloggers and graphic designers, and they show what you do. Mr. Esteban Ucros.
Thank you. Well, hello. The country where I come from doesn't make any sense. Colombia is the oldest, most stable democracy in Latin America, but it is also Colombia, the oldest, probably most belligerent guerrilla army in history. Colombia is supposed to be slowly turning into this great place to live, but I'm afraid 1 in every 10 Colombians would hardly agree with that. Colombia is the 7th most unequal country in the world, but don't ask me how is this possible. It is also the 6th happiest one. I'm not even close to being an expert in cultural studies, but I would dare to say that what defines Colombia, and to a large extent what defines the rest of the so-called developing world, is mestizaje. But not mestizaje simply as a matter of ethnic mixing, which of course we have, but mestizaje as the coexistence in the same space and time of realities that are radically different, sometimes even opposite and contradictory. Any of you who have ever been in Latin America have probably noticed from day one how in our countries development and underdevelopment, wealth and poverty, and modern and pre-modern ways of life coexist side by side. Settings as hybrid and incongruent as these are both tragic and fertile, both fascinating and sad. They feel both doomed and full of promise, depending on the time of the day you look at them. As a Latin American, these violent contrasts touch every dimension of life, and you both suffer and take advantage of them. Being a graphic designer, I've been especially sensible of the way this confrontation of realities manifests in my local ordinary visual culture. So some years ago, I started to devote a part of my life to deal with this problem. That has helped me first develop a different relationship, more delicate, more human, I would say, towards the social and cultural differences in the society I live in. And second, it has helped me enrich my understanding of, to put it in the lingo of this conference, what design can do. So I guess it is about these two things that I would like to talk to you about tonight. In my 20s, I enrolled in a graphic design program in Bogotá. I was ecstatic. I'm not exaggerating. Ecstasy is the exact right word. You have no idea how thrilled I was. We devote hours to analyzing the clever synthesis of Italian posters, of acre monograms, of America's golden generation of logo designers. I would admire the elegance of secession posters and the mastery of William Morris. I would spend hours at the library learning how to become the pickier of the pickiest when it came to type design. And then I would stay up all night trying to achieve that clean look of Swiss design. Yep. That's when I started losing my hair. But I didn't care. I was in heaven. I was finally in close contact with all these works I admired so much. However, as weeks and months went by, I started to feel odd. We would spend the whole morning dealing with this stuff, but then at noon, I would leave campus and grab a snack in a cafeteria like this, or maybe lunch in a restaurant like this. And then, with a full tummy, I would buy some gum on a place like this, drop my girlfriend a call from a place like this, and then I would stop a bus like this, make sure it was my route, get on board, and looking through a window like this, I would slowly fall asleep while traffic like this drove past my eyes. You get the point, right? Yes, in Bogotá there are banks, grocery store chains, and upscale stores with neat world-class signage. But the visual culture that prevailed, the one that would fill your eyes, was a visual culture of this sort. However, professors at college would not refer to it unless it was to make fun of it. For them, all this stuff was exactly what we, enlightened people of good taste, were supposed to correct when we were finally out working in the real world. We were kind of the ones called to civilize the awful graphic panorama of our cities. I was very uncomfortable with this idea. Of course, I believe there's a lot to learn from other cultures, and I would be the first to defend an open universal education. But this has nothing to do with that. What we had here was a total denial of local reality. How could such a large phenomena, something so key in the dynamics of the economy, something so expressive, embraced so massively, be so indisputably unworthy? It took me some time to understand that what I was being taught at college was not graphic design, but a kind of graphic design. A kind of design that I deeply love and admire, but that is far from concentrating on everything that is good about visual communication. So to sort of compensate for this narrow view, a couple of friends and I, let me introduce them to you. This is Roxy, this is Juan. Started this project we called Popular de Lujo, an initiative devoted to document Gráfica Popular, by which we basically mean graphic works created by non-professional graphic designers to help advertise products and services. From 2001, we have worn our shoes out doing extensive field work and meeting hundreds of people. And with the information collected, we have produced websites, exhibits, walking tours, interventions in the public space, books, conferences, workshops, prints, and all sorts of initiatives that aim to stress the worth and dignity we think this visual culture does have. At its most basic, the reason why I think Gráfica Popular is worthy is because it contains an astonishing deal of graphic tricks that would have never occurred to me. Take, for instance, this poster, this mural, or these designs for a bus. I think they are remarkable examples of visual creativity and of the possibilities of the two-dimensional. And they could have never occurred to me because I spent too much time working on a computer, and that has set me up for coming up with a certain set of solutions and avoiding others. Arabesque, curved texts, gradient letters, elaborated 3D effects and ornaments. All these tricks have been sort of sent to retirement, not because they are bad design or defective forms of visual communication. They are just fucking tiresome to create in Adobe Illustrator. I mean, flaming letters. As any good designer knows well, the possibilities of design are not restricted to what can be done with a computer. Rather, as great as they are, computers are limited and limiting. Gráfica Popular is almost by definition produced by people who don't have access to computers. Therefore, it is a visual genre that for years and years has been growing in its own terms outside of the realm of digital design. In the current state of things, where computers has become the standard for producing graphic design, that is nothing but a treasure. By treating these kind of things as rustic graphic atrocities, as funny, clunky drawings, we are overlooking a wonderful inventory of resources, a robust, lush, and unique genre of design. Gráfica Popular reminds us of the possibilities of visual communication. It is a healthy and fresh antidote to the cookie-cutter aesthetic that is quickly homogenizing graphic landscapes all over the world. I am sure you are already sensible of this. I am pretty aware that in recent years, there has been this return to craftsmanship, low-tech, and so on. But unfortunately, this healthy shift that has taken place on the tip of the avant-garde doesn't seem to be percolating to the streets of the developing world. Rather, our streetscape is being laid to waste with stupid Arial font and facile plotter prints. The message the new generation of street designers is internalizing is that handmade equals cheap, and that computer type, clip arts, and stock image photography equals cool. Check this out. These are two restaurants, one by the other, in Bogota. I wonder what you guys think, but I personally don't see a simple instrumental shift between what is happening in this restaurant here and what is happening on that restaurant there. It's not like we are witnessing a spirit readapting to new tools of production. We are witnessing the very extension of that spirit. Who knows if we can do anything to counteract this trend? In any case, I do think it is long past we stop looking at guys like Juan, Elliot, Gonzalo, or Oscar as some sort of funny, picturesque pseudo-designers and start looking at them as colleagues. Having a glimpse of some of the people behind Gráfica Popular is a perfect segue into the next idea I would like to share with you. I just said these graphics would have never occurred to me because I don't do handmade design. Well, I am afraid they wouldn't occur to me even if I did. And that's because perhaps even more unique and precious than their looks is the universe of references upon which they are built. In Latin America, Gráfica Popular is by definition a graphic language produced by the impoverished working class. People who haven't had the same kind of access to education and opportunities than most of us here have. People whose family history and ways of living have followed paths sometimes quite different from that of the elites. People who have drunk from unique cultural springs we couldn't even dream about. Well, Gráfica Popular is very often capable of encapsulating all those. Let me give you an example. At some point, by the mid-20th century, a handful of records of African music arrived to Cartagena, the Colombian port city on the Caribbean. They were brought by merchant marine sailors as plain curiosities. Everything about these records was strange. The language, the funky covers, the photographs, and of course, the music. Soca, reggae, highlife, music that had no relation with any local rhythm and was sung in languages completely alien to any Colombian, exotic as it gets. But who would have thought this music stuck amazingly in the local community, and the records became very coveted. It was a surprising but somehow natural thing to happen. During colonial times, Cartagena was one of South America's main gates. Over 1/10 of the 1.5 million enslaved Africans brought by Spain remained in Cartagena, and many more passed through the city on their way south. 5 centuries later, their Colombian descendants identified in a blink with this music and its aesthetics, kind of pulling out an old forgotten chord that had been buried by centuries of slavery, indoctrination, and mestizaje. We're talking about the 60s and 70s here. These are the poor neighborhoods nearby the port, so no radio station will play this music. So following a path walked by other communities of the African diaspora, African Colombians built their own sound systems, their very own portable radio stations, their very own portable discos. But they didn't stop there. As I see it, the level in which this really filled an identity vacuum is the fact that African Colombians not only embraced the music, but that they sort of branded with an ambitious and lavish graphic style. Combining the visual codes of the African records, the need for showing off that came from the privilege of owning these records, and the presence of skillful local painters, a whole visual mythology developed around these sound systems. So we're talking about a visual culture that is, yes, a marketing tool. These things are a form of business, and you need your sound system to be preferred over the next one. But we're also talking about a visual culture that chronicles on first person the way of life, the surroundings, the standards of taste, the ideas of success, sophistication, and happiness of a whole community, as well as their beliefs, their fantasies, their macho culture, their respect for violence, and their grace and sensuality. Their very own view about their very own history, about the world out there, and even about the political turmoil, whether locally or miles away. I've read that no other sound systems equals the visual flamboyance of Colombians. Who knows if that's true? What I can say is that in the context of a nation which capital city is located in the heights of the Andes, where dominant culture has been for a long time that of the Spaniards' descendants, these sound systems strike as a resounding statement of cultural autonomy by the coastal African descendant population. They really feel like a way of saying, we are here, and by the way, we're pretty cool. Can you believe that I was never talked about this at the design school? That there isn't a single book where a Colombian can learn about this? This is exactly the kind of situation in which I feel ashamed of having spent so much time learning about, I don't know, the Bauhaus. I would have never gotten to know about any of this if it wasn't for a wonderful mom-and-pop blog created by Fabián Altaona from his computer in a modest neighborhood in Barranquilla. So this is what I mean when I say that Gráfica Popular tends to condense unique universe of reference, imagination, and self-representation. To ignore things like this, to perpetuate the idea that they are not even worth mentioning, it's quite a harmful thing to do. When we do that, we are not merely losing a chapter in graphic design's library of references, but far more important, we are obscuring and failing to recognize the experiences and importance of large parts of the population. We are simplifying who they are. We are helping perpetuate the idea that the working classes are nothing but shadows in history. So if we are really committed to a more equal society, things as ordinary as Gráfica Popular acquire an unexpected importance. They are a large, concrete, sustained, and consistent means of expression of populations our societies have failed to represent properly. I guess you could stop me in my track here. You could say, hey, wait a minute, not so fast. Isn't Gráfica Popular advertising above all? How is that advertising can encapsulate all these wonders you talk about? Well, yes, Gráfica Popular is advertising. And advertising may be full of cliches and lies, but even if it doesn't depict reality, it depicts the hopes and standards of happiness, beauty, and success of a group of people. However, I would go further than that. And I would tell you that at some level, Gráfica Popular is more than plain advertising. It is a form of self-expression we don't have a name for. Let me explain that. With Popular de Lujo, we really wanted to go beyond simple passive documentation. So we put a big effort in tracing the people behind these graphics. As we've gotten a better understanding of what kind of persons they are, where the inspiration comes from, and how the works get commissioned, one of the things we've noticed is how, in their case, the frontier between commercial and personal work is really hard to draw. And I think the case of Jorge Montes de Oca illustrates this really well. We had a hard time getting to know Jorge. He wouldn't write his phone number on his works, and he didn't have a pin shop. He was this guy that passes by every now and then. When we finally got to know him, we were surprised from second one. First, he wasn't Colombian, he was Ecuadorian. And he wouldn't write his phone number because he didn't have one. He didn't have one because he didn't have a home. Not in Bogota, not anywhere else. Actually, he hadn't had a home after the one he had in Rio de Janeiro 30 years ago. I mean, Rio de Janeiro. You guys move easily from Madrid to Berlin, from Amsterdam to Istanbul, but for us in Latin America, hanging around like that is hard and expensive. We have quite a set of monumental obstacles, you know, the Andes, the Amazon, the stupid nationalisms, the incompetence of our politicians. And here we were, sitting in front of this penniless man who had not only been in Quito, Rio, and Bogota, but in more than 120 places all across Latin America. The length of his trip, 40 years. His only means of survival, painting murals and signage for businesses. It was such a humbling experience to talk to Jorge. He was so cosmopolitan, so cultured, so free of prejudices, virtues that I ignorantly and reflexively tended to associate with the wealthy. It happened to be that as a kid, Jorge became fascinated with the stories about remote cultures that he would hear from his mother and from the fiction books of Verne and Salgari. He was also fascinated by the figure of General Bolivar and his vision of Latin America as one single nation. So as soon as he could, he threw some paintbrushes in a backpack and set off to see the whole wild world with his own eyes. From then on, his life has been a sustained effort to make economical and national constraints irrelevant and to liberate himself from any kind of strings. I swear to you that I haven't known another truly free spirit like Jorge's. After knowing all this, how wouldn't you think of his commercial work in a completely different light? His murals are not the cliché landscape you could easily take them to be. His sirens and galleons, his depictions of local customs, his bucolic beaches, even his cheerful bananas, and his scenes of the outer space are, yes, graphics for decorating commercial retail environments, but they are at the same time a bold declaration of a Latin American of modest means of the right of not having other constraints than the one imposed by your own energy, will, and curiosity. So, as you see, what I think you have in many of the so-called Gráfica Popular is really a hybrid form halfway between advertising and self-expression. And when you think about it, it really makes a lot of sense. The urge, the compulsion, the primal need for expressing oneself plastically is, of course, not exclusive of the wealthy. Highly sensible, inquisitive, tormented spirits crushed by a restless need for self-expression are equally likely to appear in any economical strata of society. However, when you're born at the bottom of the pyramid, you don't have the spaces and time the ones at the top do to indulge into giving free rein to that need. If in general, it is hard for anyone, anywhere, to make a living as an artist, just imagine how unthinkable it would be for someone who was born in a Latin American shantytown. But if you know artists, you know they don't give up easily. So what do you do when you can't get the whole deal of what you want? Well, you negotiate and try to get a good deal. As I see it, many of these painters have found in these works they do for businesses a clever way of expressing themselves. At the same time, they ensure themselves the daily bread. The owners of the establishments, at their turn, act more as patrons than as conventional clients. They don't force the artist to adapt to a certain style, but they hire him because of his signature style, and to a large extent allow him to decide the motifs. Thus, these commercial establishments, scattered all across modest neighborhoods in Latin America, end up kind of being the galleries, the museums, the art books, the fanzines, the websites, and the Flickr galleries that working-class Latin Americans don't have. Of course, you have to be willing to read between lines to catch that. To be perfectly honest to you, I am the first to ask myself if I am not deceiving myself by believing I see artists trapped in the form of signage painters. And just when I'm doubting it, men like Arnulfo Herrada enter the stage. When we first met Arnulfo, we would keep asking him about the work he has done for businesses in Bogotá. Stuff like this or this. But he would always divert the conversation towards some esoteric ramblings that sounded like pure nonsense to us. It was always the same. So at some point we kind of quit insisting and started to actually pay attention to what the guy was saying. And we were amazed. It happened to be that from early in his life, Arnulfo was both blessed and cursed with the ability to see and hear things most of us can't. During his 60 years of age, he's been recurrently visited by spirits, both good and evil, that deliver messages and take him on trips. Flying over the waters, he had seen catastrophes to come. He has had a glimpse of both heaven and hell. He has seen people turn into donkeys in New Year's Eve, and more than once, he has been visited in his room by Satan himself. He calls all these revelations. So we asked him if he had ever painted this, and he said nope, because he had never had the time or the money to buy the painting materials. Arnulfo is really, really poor. Here's the neighborhood he lives in. So we told him to go ahead and paint his revelations, and we would pay for them any price he said. A couple of weeks after, he showed up with stuff like this. One can only imagine how painful it would have been to live with all this inside of you for 60 years. And who knows how many spirits like these are trapped in poverty and humiliation. As anyone knows well, self-expression is not a nice to have, but it is a basic human need as vital as water or oxygen. I don't know if the word for this is art, and honestly, I am not really interested to get into that conversation. It is self-expression, and to me that encapsulates all its importance. So I think one of the big messages here is that we have to be extremely careful to what we consider bad design. Up to this point, I tried to explain why Gráfica Popular is a lot more than picturesque, why it matters. What is that it at stake when a cultural expression like this is belittled? I hope I have had some success convincing you, or at least confusing you. Anyway, to wrap up, I would like now to talk briefly about what I have learned from all this about the power of design, about what I think it means to be a designer. There is something very interesting in all this story. I am sure I wouldn't have been able to identify all this I just talked about if I weren't a designer. As important as understanding the worth of Gráfica Popular has been to me, it has been to discover the power of a designer's point of view. And I guess that's what I aspire to be the takeaway message of this talk, the power of design for doing a lot more than designing. With Popular de Lujo, we have done books, exhibits, websites, and so on. But honestly, what I like the most of everything we have put together are these demonstrations, talk shows, and workshops where the painters are the main stars. I would hate to sound grandiose, but I think that at their tiny level, these activities have helped bridge the gap that separates classes in Colombia. We have gathered in the same room, people that otherwise would hardly talk to each other. And that's a lot more than what a beautiful coffee table book can do. In these activities, we barely design anything, but I do think that at some extent it takes a designer to come up with them. And that's because we designers have a particular sensibility. We are not only good at making, but we are good at seeing. We tend to marvel at things that are considered rubbish for many people. Just think of how many stupid collections we designers hold. Why that is, I am not sure, but I suspect it has to do with the fact that we know what it takes to create. We know how hard it is to synthesize an idea, to display it with wit or elegance. We know the satisfaction that comes from putting something into the world people identify with or come around to. So I guess that'll make us more inclined to feel empathy towards what others have created. That make us, for sure, the all-star collectors of the trivial. But while some may see this as a childish, autistic behavior, I think it is quite important. A designer's mind frame can be a powerful tool to foster empathy. So at the beginning, I said that it is very narrow to see design only as the great work of Anglo-Saxon masters. I would now add that it is also narrow to see design merely as a matter of designing. The ability we have come to label as design is in fact a very singular set of lens for approaching and experience reality. design as a tool for the humanities, if you like. It is when I think of designers as this group of sharp observers scattered all around the globe that I realize we're an important and necessary cultural force. We can do something very, very, very important and urgent. We can point out overlooked values. We can stress the forgotten dignity of people and things. We can fight back the simplification, flattening, and schematization of reality. We can slow down this crazy blind race of redesigning, reinventing, readapting. That's an extraordinary breed of designers, I think. So let's be careful not to transform this beautiful profession in an exercise of intolerance and indoctrination. Do we really need a tidy, cool, and sleek world as much as we need a generous and inclusive one? Let's say goodbye for good to the times of absolute truths. Let's not overwatch our ideas. Let's not innovate for the sake of innovation. Let's consider the possibility of us being wrong. Let's embrace what's different, rare, ugly, and even incomprehensible to us. I like to see Popular de Lujo as the way my friends and I have managed to work on that line within our particular context. So, just 1 minute, please. I started this talk mentioning how uneven is my country. Beyond the inequity in access to opportunities and material goods, in Colombia there is a rampant form of inequity that I would say is the parent of the rest, the way people treat other people. Colombian society is profoundly classist. Expression of the working class are systematically devalued both by ignoring them or by insulting them when people make fun of them or treat them in condescending and patronizing ways. As long as people don't show towards the experiences of the others the respect they want for their own, I don't think a society has a promising future. So on that same line, allow me to finish with a quote. If you like, you can forget about everything I said tonight, but please do remember this quote by philosopher Charles Taylor. Non-recognition or misrecognition can inflict harm. It can be a form of oppression. Imprisoning someone in a false, distorted, and reduced mode of being shows not just a lack of due respect, but it can inflict a grievous wound, saddling its victims with a crippling self-hatred. Due recognition is not just a courtesy we owe to people. It is a vital human need. Thank you.
Do I understand it right, because you speak very fast, that you are partially archiving by way of, as a social design project, this form of art?
Right.
Yeah. Because you find it neglected and you find it insulting to neglect such a huge part of what is in the Colombian soul.
That's right. That's exactly right.
Yeah. How do you position yourself as a designer in that, or don't you care?
Well, the work I do is I also work in branding. I mean, that's like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. So that's like the other part of my personality. And I don't think that's at all related with this. I like to think the work, the designer work I do for this is just a matter of learning how to observe than to actually design stuff. So I guess that's when a graphic design mind frame is useful to me in this project, not necessarily in designing stuff.
There was something quite interesting you talked about. There was a lot in your presentation, and I'm sure I'll come up with more questions, so will the audience later on. But one thing that was interesting, you talked about this picture of the restaurants, the two restaurants, right? Yeah. And you said, I'm not sure that this is an evolution, but almost you seem to be touching on the idea that the hand and the relationship between the hand and the craft was something that you saw as being a moment of recognition, a moment of possibility. Talking about Mr. Hyde and Dr. Jaco, how do you deal with that? Because in your daily life, you are using computers, you are
I barely use my hand for anything, and that's something that I would like to correct at some point. I mean, I'm kind of slow in these processes, so I think that for the last few years I've been kind of researching these and starting to understand what's really the worth of it. And I would love at some point in my career to actually quit computers at some point and go back to basics, to the use of hand. Yeah, it's something that I really want to incorporate in my work at some point.
This morning we have seen the food designers who were very archiving and researching as well. Do you think you do that as well, very much towards the research and the archiving. Do you think, why are designers going in that direction? Do you have a clue for that?
Collecting. Well, that's a good question.
Seems like we tend to make less and archive and analyze more.
I don't know. I think that there's been people collecting from years and years on, but at some point we realized that there was some worth in the ordinary, you know? And this seems to be like a recent sort of thing. I don't know if it's related with social history or something like that, but at some point we kind of realized that these everyday things that are around us really have a worth on its own, and if nobody collects them now, they are probably going to disappear forever. Yeah.
You did bring up the authenticity as one of the elements that you were interested in. It's very possible that a form of collecting is a form of discovery also of authenticity. So that's an interesting topic about communities and connections.
We have to stop, Esteban Ucros. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your patience.
Popular de lujo.